we gathered here to celebrate the life of my grandmother. Now the funny thing is, she actually would have been, she would have hated that we're making such a fuss over her. But you know what, sorry Grandma, we don't care. You touched so many of our lives, and you mean so much to us, we're here. There are two things that come to my mind when I think of my grandmother. The first is her generosity, and the second is her strength. I think she meshed these two qualities in the best way possible. She was always willing to give whatever she could of herself, but it was on her terms. There's no doubt about that. Her generosity, her caring spirit came out in so many different ways. One of my favorite examples is when we were children, we'd go to Cincinnati to go to the Reds games. Grandma was always tasked with making us sandwiches for the drive down. I think when most people volunteered / forced to make a couple of dozen sandwiches, probably would have just made a bunch and forced us to eat whatever we got. But not our grandmother. We would each place our custom orders and have our individual preferences catered to. I believe I would buy bologna with mustard, but who really knows? It was 20 years ago. She never failed to do what she could to please us grandchildren, or really anyone else. Even in the later years, when I would go visit the condo, apparently there's a lot of mustard stories in our family, she would make sure there was honey mustard in the house. And I know this because it was just for me, because oftentimes I would find it years expired. Her strength is another trait that will stick with me the rest of my life. She came to this country by herself at the age of 12. And while she never talked about it much, the strength to accomplish that is something I can't even fathom. Her strength and generosity was a perfect display last week when I talked to her for the last time. We chatted for a few minutes about the house, about my son, about my upcoming visit. Then all of a sudden someone walked into her room and she said, "You know what, sorry, I gotta go," and just hung up the phone. And just like she moved on from me because there were others that needed her, now whoever came to visit her is probably in this room right now, and I don't blame you for forcing her to get off the phone because you didn't force her. She wanted to. She demonstrated the strength that she raised 3 daughters, went back to grad school in her 50s, I could barely handle it in my 20s, and then started off an entire second career and worked for the next 20-ish years. She battled through the death of my grandfather, health issues, and many other things we probably don't even know. She only admitted to me twice that she was ever scared. One time we were actually in Israel, it was late at night, everybody else had left the room, and she began to talk to me about wanting to move to Israel, but how she was scared about doing it and learning Hebrew. And I asked her, what other languages did she know? And she started talking about how she learned German as a youth, because she was forced to go to boarding school to escape her home. Now I wish I remember the details of the story, I truly don't. But this was the first time I heard the strongest woman I know admit that she was afraid. The only other time she ever admitted she was afraid of me was actually this past July. Zeb and I were able to visit her for a couple days. Zeb was in his full glory and was standing on her window looking at the street below. And I'll never forget her just watching him in the window. And as that visit wound down, she told me, she opened up that obviously she couldn't move so well anymore and she was afraid of losing her independence. She didn't want to live on anyone else's terms. She wanted to live by herself on her own terms. My grandmother taught me you could be tough as nails. Admit when you're afraid, although not very often, and be one of the most generous people I know. All on your own terms. She was lucky enough to know 13 great-grandchildren, including my son, albeit for such a brief time. But he and the rest of them will know her. They will know the qualities that made her a special person. She will live on through them. Our love, Grandma.